For months, the world asked the same question. Why wasn't she at the Queen's funeral? Cameras searched. Headlines speculated. The palace stayed silent. But now, the truth is finally emerging. And it's more shocking than anyone expected. Was it illness? Scandal? A silent exile masked as protocol? Or was it her own decision, a final message to the monarchy? What really happened behind those closed palace doors is now coming to light. And once you hear it, you may never look at that empty seat the same way again. The answer changes everything. And it's time you knew. The absence that left everyone speechless. It was a day the world would never forget. The Queen's funeral, watched by billions, attended by presidents, royals, and dignitaries. A moment of unity, reverence, and finality. But as cameras panned across the cathedral and the royal family took their seats, one question echoed louder than the hymns. Where is she? Viewers noticed instantly. A key royal figure, once prominently photographed beside Her Majesty, was nowhere to be seen. No arrival footage, no close-up in the pews, not a single mention in official commentary. Within minutes, the internet caught on. Why wasn't she there? Concern turned to confusion. Then, speculation exploded. Was she unwell? Was she banned? Was this her own decision? Social media flooded with hashtags. Conspiracy theories raced through every platform. Some called it a quiet protest. Others feared personal heartbreak. But a darker few suggested something more deliberate. A royal disappearance, wrapped in scandal. The palace? Silent. No confirmation, no denial, not even a vague statement. Just a total, chilling absence. And that silence spoke louder than any announcement could. The funeral was planned down to the second, a royal reporter whispered. You don't just miss it. Not someone like her. She wasn't just missing from the room, she was missing from the narrative. But to understand the weight of that absence, we must first look at what she missed. A funeral like no other, steeped in history, emotion, and centuries-old ritual. And yet, one chair remained cold. Why? A funeral like no other operation. London Bridge, the plan for the Queen's funeral, had been rehearsed for decades. From the moment of her passing, every step was executed with flawless precision. Mourning banners, national silence, formal processions, everything unfolded like a royal ballet of grief. The Queen's coffin, lined with lead and sealed with tradition, rested under constant watch. Bells tolled. Crowds wept. Leaders from across the globe bowed their heads. It was more than a farewell. It was the end of an era. And every major royal, from King Charles to Princess Charlotte, played a visible role in honoring her legacy. But one presence was conspicuously absent. As cameras captured the grief etched on every royal face, hers was the one face missing from every frame. Not at the service, not at the procession, not even behind the scenes. It wasn't just that she wasn't filmed, one insider noted. She genuinely wasn't there. Why? That's what puzzled everyone, especially given her once close bond with the Queen. While others mourned openly in Westminster Abbey, her silence became a vacuum. Some wondered, had she been quietly asked to step aside? Others feared something much worse. Illness? Mental health? Or a deeper, more personal pain? No answers came. No appearances followed. The Queen's funeral became the most watched royal event in history, and yet, it left behind a haunting question. Why did she disappear when the world needed to see her most? She vanished on the most visible day in royal history. So where was she? If she wasn't in Westminster or Windsor or Balmoral, then where did she go? Let's trace the trail. or rather the lack of one, and uncover just how carefully her steps were hidden from the world. Where was she? As the funeral unfolded, journalists scrambled to track her. Flight logs were checked, security movements analyzed, but nothing surfaced. She wasn't spotted at any family vigil. No eyewitness reports placed her at Windsor. No royal convoy was seen heading to Balmoral. It was as if she'd vanished from the royal grid. Even more telling, her official social media accounts went completely dark. No black and white tribute post, no candle emoji, no shared memory of the Queen. The silence was eerie, especially from someone once praised for her sensitivity in public moments. It was like a light switched off, noted a royal social media analyst. There were whispers that she had flown abroad in the days leading up to the Queen's passing, that she had sought refuge in a private estate far from London. Some even claimed she was staying in a secluded European villa, unreachable even by phone. There's no trace of her, one source admitted, and that's not accidental. Others suggested her absence wasn't spontaneous, it was planned. A long time coming, carefully decided between her team, and possibly even royal officials. Could she have known she wouldn't be welcomed? Could this be an exit disguised as grief? Or was it personal heartbreak playing out in privacy? Disappearing in plain sight isn't easy, unless someone wants you gone. But perhaps the biggest question wasn't where she went, but why no one was allowed to ask. Because as the world searched for answers, the palace said nothing, not a word. And in royal tradition, silence is rarely accidental. The palace's deafening silence. No name, no mention, no explanation. In the world of monarchy, where every public appearance is choreographed and every word is weighed before being spoken, silence is not just a pause. It is a strategy. And in the aftermath of the Queen's funeral, the royal family employed that strategy with chilling precision. Her absence sparked global speculation. The press was relentless. Headlines screamed. Commentators circled. The public demanded answers. But the palace? Nothing. No official statement, no press briefing, no carefully crafted reassurance. Her name was never uttered by a single royal spokesperson, not once. Even seasoned royal correspondents, those with years of inside access and whispered connections, found themselves in a blackout. "I've never seen the palace shut down like this," one noted. "Not even during Diana's death. This was different." The silence wasn't avoidance. It felt tactical, intentional, as though something or someone had been deliberately erased from the royal narrative. Some believe it was a PR move. With tensions in the family still simmering, her presence could have risked distraction, or worse, controversy. They didn't want drama on a day of mourning, one source speculated. But others wonder, was it really about protecting the image of the monarchy? Or protecting the secret that her absence represented? And that's the most unsettling part. No clarification, no denial, no comfort. Just a void. And in the royal household, where perception shapes power, a void speaks volumes. As the world searched for her, the palace quietly moved on. The message was subtle, but unmistakable. She was not part of the story. At least, not this one. In the royal family, silence isn't always golden. Sometimes, it's a warning. So what was behind that silence? Health issues? Emotional turmoil? A long-buried rift finally boiling over? Theories swirled, but even those closest to the palace whispered different truths: health, grief, or scandal. The first whispers pointed to health. Undisclosed medical reasons, one royal insider claimed, but when asked for details, they fell silent. There was no hospital sighting, no official diagnosis, not even a hint of recovery or rest. If she was ill, why hide it so thoroughly? Why not offer the same transparency extended to other royals in the past? Others close to the family offered a softer theory: grief. Perhaps the loss was simply too much. After all, she had shared private moments with the Queen. She'd been seen wiping away tears at earlier family events. Could this have been the breaking point? Did she step away not out of rebellion, but out of pain? But not everyone was convinced. In some corners of the palace, the word exclusion came up, quietly, carefully, as if merely saying it might be dangerous. She wasn't on the plan, said one source. She wasn't invited. Could this have been an orchestrated absence? A subtle form of punishment? One that let her not attend while keeping the public guessing? And then there's the scandal theory. The years of tension, the quiet feuds, the protocols she once challenged. Had the funeral become the final line, one she wasn't allowed to cross? Some insiders believed the Queen's passing closed not just a life, but a door. And behind that door, a woman, quietly locked out. Was she grieving, or was she being erased? But the twist in this tale is even stranger when you remember this. They were close. She and the Queen shared more than royal titles. They shared letters, long talks, even laughter. So why would she miss the funeral of the one monarch who once stood in her corner? The bond she shared with the Queen. Their relationship began quietly. No cameras, no speeches. Just the occasional smile. A private moment shared at Balmoral. A whispered comment across a dinner table. But those who watched closely saw something rare. Genuine warmth. The Queen, known for her reserve, had taken a liking to her. There were personal visits, not public, not staged. Afternoon teas behind palace walls, handwritten notes exchanged on. Birthdays. The Queen was said to appreciate her honesty, her humor, her strength. They had an understanding, said a former palace aide. It wasn't always spoken, but it was there. During times of public criticism, the Queen had quietly offered support. A subtle gesture at an event. A personal phone call after a difficult headline. Even a private token, passed from hand to hand, that insiders say the Queen had once intended specifically for her. A keepsake. A quiet reassurance. A sign of trust. So the absence hit harder because of the bond they shared. This wasn't just a missed funeral. This was the end of a relationship that had mattered. Maybe more than anyone realized. And still, she did not come. Was it out of heartbreak? Out of conflict? Or because, despite the Queen's affection, someone else had made the decision for her? She lost a monarch. But maybe she also lost the one royal who truly saw her. And in the monarchy, even love and grief are shaped by rank, rules, and rituals. So could it be that tradition itself kept her away? Was it protocol or politics? Let's look at what royal custom says, and how personal emotion gets pushed aside when the crown is watching. Royal protocol versus personal grief. In the House of Windsor, nothing is left to chance, not even grief. The monarchy doesn't just operate on emotion, it functions on protocol. Who stands where, who speaks when, who mourns how. It's all written out, sometimes decades in advance. So was her absence from the Queen's funeral a personal decision, or a consequence of rules we'll never see? Some experts pointed to royal hierarchy. Not every family member is given ceremonial visibility, especially in state affairs. Those without titles, those on the outer edge of the royal circle, are often left out, diplomatically but unmistakably. Was she simply too far down the royal chain? But that theory doesn't hold up completely. Others with equal or lesser status were present, seated respectfully, participating with dignity. And unlike her, they didn't share a personal bond with the late Queen. So why her? And why now? Others suspect internal politics played a role. Whispers from courtiers suggest there were discussions prior to the funeral about seating, optics, media attention. Could she have declined to attend if it meant being hidden in the shadows? Or worse, could she have been told that her presence would only stir controversy? And then there's the emotional cost. Not all grief can be put on display. Maybe it wasn't rank. Maybe it wasn't exile. Maybe it was simply pain. Overwhelming, paralyzing pain. Enough to stay away, enough to mourn in private. But even that truth, if it is the truth, was never confirmed. In a palace of protocol, feelings must wait their turn. But perhaps this absence wasn't born in a single moment, but in a long, winding road of royal friction. Because if you look back, the signs were always there. Could this funeral simply be the final, silent consequence of a history that never healed? Past controversies. Catching up? This wasn't her first absence, and it wasn't the first time headlines questioned her place in the royal world. For years, she had walked the line between tradition and trouble, and sometimes she crossed it. She broke protocol in interviews, made independent decisions without royal sign-off, attended events that were seen as inappropriate by senior aides. Even her fashion choices had drawn rebuke in the past. Small things, maybe, but in the world of royalty, even the smallest ripples become tsunamis. Inside the palace, she was seen by some as a breath of fresh air, but by others, a risk. And in the tight, whispering halls of Buckingham, risks are not taken lightly. She was unpredictable, said one senior aide, not scandalous, not reckless, just outside the system. Tension with senior royals was never public, but never hidden. Seating arrangements at major events, photographs mysteriously cropped, last-minute itinerary changes. These weren't accidents. They were signals. And every signal pointed to the same idea. She wasn't entirely welcome. Some reports suggest that when funeral plans were finalized under Operation London Bridge, there was pushback from senior figures about including her. Not because of animosity, they say, but optics. Too many headlines, too much baggage. And in a state funeral where every second was meant to honor the Queen, distractions were not allowed. So was this exclusion, if it was one, the result of years of silent resistance? Had the Crown finally drawn a line, quietly but firmly? No scandal, no headline, just an empty seat, and a history that spoke louder than words. In the royal world, mistakes aren't forgotten. They're quietly repaid. And while royal, insiders debated protocol and politics, the public had its own theories, and they didn't wait for permission to ask. Within hours, her absence had become a storm, and the internet had already declared it the most shocking royal vanishing act of the decade. Public reaction and online frenzy. As the Queen's funeral was broadcast live around the world, viewers noticed the missing face almost immediately. It started as a trickle, comments, tweets, hushed questions. Then it exploded. Hashtags like #WhereIsShe, #RoyalNoShow, and funeral absence began trending within hours. Theories poured in. Some were sympathetic. Maybe she's grieving privately. Others were outraged. How dare the palace keep this quiet? And a small but loud faction whispered something darker. Was she deliberately erased? Public opinion split in real time. On talk shows, on TikTok, in royal fan forums, even in morning news panels. "We just want the truth," said one royal follower in a viral clip. It's not about drama, it's about transparency. But as the noise grew louder, the palace's silence grew thicker. Even news outlets joined the speculation. BBC avoided the topic. ITV called her absence noticeable. International coverage, especially in American and Australian media, was far more direct. She's missing, and the palace won't say why. Reporters tried reaching out. Aides gave polite nods, but no one gave answers. It became one of the most Googled royal questions of the week. More than who designed Catherine's hat. More than what Charles said in his first speech. The missing royal's name eclipsed every detail, because absence doesn't go unnoticed in a family built on presence. And in that absence, the public projected every theory, every fear, every truth they weren't being told. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was a demand for accountability. The royal funeral united the world in grief and divided it in mystery. But for all the guessing, the internet forgot one key fact. This funeral wasn't a spontaneous event. It was a royal script, planned for years. So if she was missing, perhaps it wasn't an accident. Perhaps it was decided long ago. And maybe, just maybe, her name was never even on the list. Operation London Bridge. Nothing about Queen Elizabeth's funeral was spontaneous. Every minute was pre-planned, every word rehearsed. Operation London Bridge, the top-secret funeral protocol, had been in place for decades. From the first toll of the bell to the final note of the choir, this was a royal performance on a global stage. And everyone had a role to play, except, apparently, her. According to insiders, the operation was meticulous. Invitations had been drafted years in advance, regularly reviewed and updated. Seating charts were decided by senior aides, run past Buckingham courtiers, and finalized with military precision. Even the floral arrangements had meaning. Nothing and no one was left to chance. So if she wasn't included, it wasn't an oversight. It was intentional. Some royal analysts pointed out that Operation London Bridge didn't include certain non-working royals. Others noted that anyone perceived as controversial was placed in a gray area, not officially banned, but quietly omitted. If you're not on the list, one source said, you don't get added at the last minute. That's not how this works. Still, this begs the question, was she ever considered part of that plan? Years ago, when she was more visible, more accepted, would she have had a seat? Or was she always destined to be excluded? And if her name was quietly removed, when did it happen? Was it during one of the quieter scandals, or after a private fallout? One palace insider described it as strategic absence. Another called it diplomatic invisibility. But the result was the same. While the world mourned under a global spotlight, she remained outside the script. And in a royal family built on ceremony, that might be the clearest message of all. She wasn't missing, she just wasn't written into the final act. But maybe, just maybe, that was her message. In a monarchy where every gesture is symbolic, could her absence have been a statement in itself? A silent act of rebellion? A final farewell, not to the Queen, but to the institution? A statement without words. In royal life, not doing something can say more than doing it. She didn't release a public statement. She didn't post a tribute. She didn't even appear in the background of a photo. Her silence was total, and in a world of royal rules, that silence felt loud. Some believe it was her own quiet way of drawing a line. After years of strained relations, formal smiles, and strategic appearances, maybe this was her moment to say, no more. Not with a press conference, not with a book deal, just with absence. A decision to step away from the crown, the cameras, and the choreography, even if just for a day. Others argue she was sending a message, not to the public, not even to the royal family, but to herself. She needed to reclaim something, a source close to her reportedly said. She needed to feel like a person again, not a headline. Refusing to perform, to participate, to be seen, was her way of saying she wouldn't be reduced to a role. Of course, there's a more painful possibility, that she wanted to be there, but wasn't allowed. And if that's true, then her silence wasn't a message at all. It was a wound, An exile disguised as discretion. A mourning that had to happen behind closed doors because the doors were never opened to her. Either way, it worked. Her absence made headlines across the globe. Royal watchers debated the meaning. The public speculated. And still, she said nothing. Not a word. Because maybe she knew, the less she said, the more they'd listen. You don't always have to speak to be heard. Sometimes, you just have to vanish. And now, the question isn't just why she missed the funeral, but what her absence means for her future. Is this the beginning of the end of her public life, or the start of a new chapter, one on her own terms? What this means for her future role. In the monarchy, disappearing once can be forgiven. Disappearing twice? That raises alarms. Her absence at the Queen's funeral wasn't just about grief. It may have redefined her role in the royal system. Some insiders are already predicting the fallout. Fewer appearances, less involvement, and possibly an unofficial step back. Not public, not declared, just quieter, faded. Is this a slow fade into royal exile? A new Diana-like figure, but in silence, not in scandal? Or is she preparing for something different? A return, perhaps, on her terms, in her words, when she decides to speak, and not a moment before. Others in the palace are reportedly nervous. There's always a risk when someone vanishes, one aide admitted. People start filling in the blanks. And right now, the blanks around her are growing larger. Was the Queen's funeral a breaking point? Or a turning point? If she does return, it might not be with tiaras and titles. It might be in a different role entirely. Advocate, author, even outsider. One who speaks not from within the palace walls, but from beyond them. And if she doesn't return, that silence will echo for years. The crown survives, as it always does. But the human cost, that's harder to measure. One absence may not sink a monarchy, but it might fracture a legacy. And in a family where legacy means everything, that's no small consequence. The royal road may not end in scandal. Sometimes, it ends in silence. And finally, the question that's haunted this entire story from the very beginning. No theories, no distractions, just the raw truth. Why didn't she go? What do we know? And what do we still not? So why didn't she attend? The palace won't say. She won't say. But here's what we do know. She wasn't seen at any funeral-related event. She made no public appearance. There was no travel record, no official explanation. All press inquiries were met with either stone silence or vague shrugs. That's not an accident. That's a decision. Multiple sources have floated possibilities. Health, perhaps physical, perhaps emotional. A quiet condition kept under wraps. Others point to protocol, to seating charts, to optics. Some believe it was an agreement, a better for everyone sort of thing, one that allowed her to mourn in peace, or kept her from mourning at all. There's the theory of punishment, that the absence wasn't hers to choose, that her presence was denied, quietly but firmly, by the palace machine. And there's the theory of power, that this was her decision, her line in the sand, her moment to reclaim agency. But maybe the real truth is somewhere in between. Maybe it was a mix of pain, politics, and personal choice. A perfect storm of circumstance that left her with no real options, only consequences. Whatever the reason, one fact remains: she was not there. And that fact alone changed everything. The Queen is gone, the world is watching, and her absence has become part of history. You don't need to attend a funeral to be remembered. Sometimes, not showing up is what people remember most. Her absence wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a carefully calculated move, whether by her, the palace, or both. The Queen's funeral marked the end of an era, but for one missing royal, it marked something else. The beginning of a new, uncertain future. Will she return to royal life? Or has she quietly closed the door for good? As the dust settles, one thing is clear. The silence is over, and the truth has arrived. Now that we know why she didn't attend, the real question is, what happens next? Stay tuned.